This is Critical Nonsense, our high-lowbrow show about culture, science, and tech. This week, Aaron asks us about ask versus guess cultures, and I ask everyone about their ideal working hours. Woo!
Have I told you lately that I love you, Aaron? This is what a Joey sounds like, and
I love you too.
we have someone else here.
Oh, I believe in a thing called Joey and Jess. Just the Joey and Jess. This is what an Aaron sounds like.
And this is what an executive producer and the darkness, Jess Vander, sounds like.
Hi, this is Jess.
Hi, guys.
I always liked, what was their other song?
They had another one?
Love is all
Did they?
feeling taken over.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I always
Love
would
is only
like,
a feeling.
They bled, there was somewhere between, the darkness themselves and like Avril Lavigne and her high notes. Like, I just always conflate them in my head. This is what I do.
Can you
Love
imagine? Critical High Notes, a lesser-known segment.
Wait, okay.
Critical high note.
First show note.
Yeah.
First show note immediately. There's a fantastic video by Adam Neely that breaks down why the key change in All By Myself is one of the best ones in music history and why it makes everyone's like shoulders shimmy and shiver. I will put it in the show notes, and he's not wrong. He's not wrong.
And he's not wrong.
Anymore.
Alex just joined and completely missed all the high notes. Aaron, hit another high note for Alex.
Well, here we go. No, hold on. My brain, it's finding one. It's calculating which high note it wants to hit. Wait. Okay. No, it's not going to happen. Okay, there we go. It was Jamiroquai, and it was so high that my whole throat just said, I don't like you. Don't even try that. Don't even hit. The voice box said, I'm going on vacation. Bye-bye. Because, I mean, legitimately, I'm sorry. No, we will just touch this. First of all, Jamiroquai and Adam Levine both are wild pop tenors. I think every dude that has ever done a cappella between the years of 2003 and 2015 at one point arranged a song and was like, I can do this. I got this. And then when it's in the original key, you're like, no, just kidding. I see you.
You're like, I thought I had canned heat in my heels, but turns out I don't.
I had
no canned heat.
Listen, it was like beans. It was very much canned, Great Northern beans, most likely the great signature store brand from Vaughn's. That's what I understand to be the case. West Coast humor, yeah.
I got
Truly
canned
Aaron
tepid
and
in my
Joey
heels
humor.
tonight, baby.
Oh, it's nice to be back.
Just
Well,
a
that was the
specific
housekeeping.
flavor of nonsense.
We're just cleaning up the high notes, and
That's right.
Just checking on the range. Yep, check.
Yeah.
Have it. Great.
Nice.
House is clean.
Wonderful.
Have it.
Who's going first this week?
Ooh. Should I? Is that the listeners can
Yeah.
hear Jess pointing at
Yeah.
me as saying, Powers, go first. You do it. You do it right now. So I got one. I got one. So it's going to take a little bit of explaining. I know I've been gone for a hot minute. And so what have I been doing in my time away from the podcast? Just watching YouTube. That's it. So,
That's great.
Well, specifically, I should say self-care YouTube. Like that's just been the cozy spiral that I have found myself in. It has taken a turn, maybe even a triple Lutz. Just wow. So one of the videos, and we'll post it in the show notes, and I will, as we're talking about this, pull up the actual psychologist who posted about this, put forth an idea, like one of those big sweeping generalizations of all of humanity into two buckets. But I found it really, really compelling. And the two buckets are those who come from ask cultures and those who come from guess cultures, families, organizations, teams, etc. In guess cultures, folks are a lot more prone to be unclear and indirect in service of not offending anyone. It's very popular in the Midwest, for example, to not probe, not pry, be indirect, and guess at someone's feelings rather than being direct. And then the stereotype of the Northeasterners usually falls more in the ask camp, which is direct, clear, unambiguous, and expecting that same thing in return.
Hi.
Yeah, have you met Joseph? And so this thing struck me because of, lots of people, lots of families, especially over the past, let's say 10 years, but especially in the past couple of years with the pandemic, with people moving all over the place, with sort of growing into different patterns with friends and family, starting to see distances or distinctions between how they communicate with others. They can see where maybe they grew up in an ask culture and then lived in a guess culture, or vice versa. And I suppose my question to you, dear listeners and dear Joseph and Jess, is how does one navigate the journey from ask culture to guess culture, or vice versa?
It's interesting because I think there's probably categories within this ask and guess dynamic where I think I sit very much in an ask culture based on how you're feeling in a moment, potentially based on interactions that we're having or things that we're sharing. But I'm very much guess or don't ask about someone's personal information or things that exist outside that they're not giving. And I don't know if that's a dynamic or if there are additional ones as well. Jess?
Well, this is what I'm wondering, Aaron. Was there a defined scope of what an ask or a guess culture is covering? Are there common categories, or is it sort of supposed to be just in general? Or is it for conflict resolution? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, one of them is really about just in general communication skills. That's kind of where this sort of rests within, is less so about common values or anything at that sort of intrinsic level, and more so about figuring out how to best navigate communication in different groups of people, especially when you see that there's a difference, a pretty mega difference. That's kind of the main context that it comes up in, because I'll post some content. The Atlantic wrote about it back in 2010. I guess it's had its moment in the pop psych conversation. But ask cultures might have thoughts about, it can't really hurt to ask in one's mind. If it's there, just ask. Being really direct, as we talked about, being super clear and straightforward. But then the downside, of course, is being perceived as presumptuous or rude, because you're, bypassing that culture's norms or that group of people's communications norms. And I can say this from experience. Can I do quick story time? Random side story time?
Yes.
So Ohio might be the land in which guest culture was born. I'm pretty sure Cincinnati's core exports were pork and guest culture. I think that's it. So I remember moving from, my entire childhood's families and even community, in Ohio's style of communication, and then having my first full-time strategy job, and it was with a whole team that was born and bred New Yorkers on top of being strategists. So being particular oriented toward the direct, the precise and whatnot. And I think I became Tums' number one customer over the course of the year, with all the antacid and ulcers that were building up just from being I don't know how to talk to anyone. Literally every time I open my mouth, people just say I'm confusing and that they don't know what I think. I just told you. It was the most gnarly and high-pitch inducing experience of my entire life. And it was like having my DNA rewritten, because then after that, I've found, and this has been years in the making, I now can't, I like my struggles to communicate in guess are significant. I don't know how to speak in guess fluently anymore because all I want is like clarity and directness and just say what you feel, because then we don't have to go in circles around it. All things that I learned over time, but I think I'm sad that in learning Spanish, I've lost my grasp on English, if you will, as opposed to being fluent in both. I don't know. Do you get like? Did you guys? Does this resonate? Like, did either of you guys come from?
Is there a benefit to guest culture? I'm like
such a northeaster.
Sort of.
I love it.
Joey,
I'm just like wondering, like, yeah.
Yeah, there must be, because even though you seem to identify with the ask culture, I would say compared to me, you have more guess in you than you may think. In the sense of how even when, we're writing our email writing styles, for example, which to listeners is a very, very specific thing. But when I first came to Sylvain, I would write emails like, please send this at this time. And Joey was like, whoa, slow down. That is like
spicy,
demanding. Like, what? Excuse you. Take a step back.
I love it.
And I feel like there has to be, right? Because if the sort of the negative side effect of being presumptuous or rude exists, for maybe to a very generous degree for a certain subset of culture, it has to still kind of be there on the spectrum, right? Like there probably is a version of ask that is too forward.
So,
forward, quote unquote.
Right. And I think that everything is scalar, which is a really good point. Like the extreme of ask culture could be unbridled in terms of its directness and rudeness, but then the extreme of guest culture is but like, did you just say anything? Like, are you just a senator in the room? Because I truly don't know what's between those words.
What are you talking about?
And some of the things that come with some of the excellent features of guest culture are being excellent in nonverbal communication and cues, so that like reading people visually and reading body language becomes hugely important because you're reading situations and you're reading people's literal body language, physical body language. That's one of them. And then another one is that you just leave a lot of room for navigating different cultural norms, because from group to group, even though yes, in guest culture, there's this presumption of this is how you communicate. But if you become sort of the gray in the room, you can let everybody's different rainbow colors shine out. And then you can sort of figure out and navigate your way through it. Like, oh, got it. This is how they do it. Got it. That's how they do it. I can now talk to all of them and process that.
Yeah, in a way, I kind of think the naming, I mean, look, I'm a strategist, so I'm going to go after it. I'm like, the naming does not do justice to guess.
True.
Because it's not fair to make the opposite of ask guess, because what you're just describing is like implicit communicate, like other kinds of communication that otherwise, like if an ask culture is inherently I must explicitly confirm everything, the opposite of that shouldn't be I'm taking total shots in the dark.
True.
Right?
True,
like,
yeah.
Can there be like somewhere, there has to be somewhere that's like, I'm paying attention. I'm trying to infer the things that I am seeing and be smart and be astute.
I think that's the word. I was just doing it. I was like, ask culture versus infer culture feels like maybe a more like honest way to be thinking about how people are navigating it, which is like they're just doing a lot more based on receipt rather than necessarily delivery. A little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, explicit versus implicit or things like that to fit. It's just interesting to think about how much like spoken or unspoken power dynamics fit within these conversations as well, right? And sort of social hierarchy and things like that. Like I'm thinking about my interactions with like, the Chinese community that I interact with here in the US, like either immigrants or first generation folks, and there tends to be like a much more direct conversation, but often around like there's still this like categorical thing of like where are your privacy settings set? Like you can almost imagine like a list of privacy settings, and like some are ticked in different cultures and some are ticked in different one. Like, right, like conversations about like your physical appearance or money like will come up like very quickly and without sort of any like like no apprehension. Like the first thing that like I walk in the room, like, you look skinny, and I'm like, first of all, hello. Second of all, like,
yeah,
or like how much money do you make, or like how much did that cost, or things like that. And it's not seen as like a private thing. But then if you like, in turn, if you like dive into like how they feel about something, at least in my experience,
it's like, excuse you.
Yeah, like
no,
my emotions. No, like that's not where we go. Whereas like my sort of personal experience of like the Northeast is like you can talk about how like an individual experience is making someone feel, but you can't like probe into, there's like a propriety line of like, that's not your business and this is your business. And like where, like you have to sort of infer in those cases where things are, but you can just like come forward and act direct. Like, why did you do that? Like there is sort of a confrontational nature to things like that are happening in the space. And so that like question of even within individual companies, right? Like there's sort of like a relevance in work culture too, right? Where you have this, I don't know how much it is still being pushed. And I think we've talked about it in the past of like those like radical candor ideas and things like that. There are some business cultures that have like adopted radical candor as sort of their thing. And, you're going to like give direct feedback and you're going to like ask like probing like questions that maybe feel impolite or impolitic based on previous like work experiences, but it's around this like direct level of communication where other companies will have like, these things are things you can discuss and these things that you can't. And there's the cultural dynamic in it, to me, feels like, where do those things lie? Like, I'm curious if you think like Ohio is just like, turn all the settings to implicit, and that's like where Ohio exists as sort of like an extreme, or like, the Minnesota nice thing that we've talked about many times is like, like you're supposed to infer in the way that I say something that I don't like this, even if I tell you I do like it, because I'm not going to tell you I don't like it because that's not polite.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's an interesting line between politeness and safety, if there is a line at all, when I think about navigating a lot of guest cultures, because it's the experience of it being late at night, you're running out of gas and there's a gas station 5 miles ahead. When you walk into that gas station and there are a couple of people there, guest culture might be very, very helpful in both letting you know you should or should not walk another 10 miles to the next gas station, or you should go ahead and use their pumps. And I think that a lot of different cultures probably use those techniques from inference to monitor different types of safety, like social safety, physical safety, and like weighing some of the pros and cons of what there is to lose in that interaction. At least when I think about where, like, what aspects of it sort of still flare up for me and where it's most common in my day-to-day, I think that's where it comes up. It's when I'm feeling insecure or unsafe, I switch into guest mode a little bit more because I'm like, it's like I'm putting the radar out, because I don't know where you gonna go, and I need to know where the door in the room is so that I can sprint out if needed.
What do you think it is about the Midwest that has,
I think that's the question.
And maybe it's like there's sort of some historical relevance, or it is a product of where the immigrants that populated the region came from, or something like that. But I'm curious what about the Midwest has created that orientation? Because I think, within a lot of this like implicit or guess culture dynamics is like the reason you're doing it is because you're giving room for a lot of like external factors like power dynamics, social hierarchy, right? Like all of these things. And is there something specific to the region that has created that, or like what? Yeah, like why is the Midwest like a particularly like indirect reason if we're following both your sort of anecdotal experience and this psychologist's logic?
So my hypothesis is that the guess culture that we most associate with the Midwest is a vestige of the 50s. And I think that a lot of it comes from suburbanization. I think a lot of the mores of it were established during hyper-suburbanization. And I think the Midwest represented sort of a number of different cities that were moving from highly manufacturing-oriented hubs like Chicago or Cincinnati, Pittsburgh, Indianapolis.
Yeah.
And so like as soon as you start to develop suburbs that are outside of those, there are these communities that literally have to develop their own new set of norms and standards at a time when stepping out of line or being seen as different increasingly became a risk as you get into the McCarthy era in the 60s and the Red Scare and whatnot. So that sort of combination of factors, I think, created a sense of you need to always figure out who you're surrounded by to figure out whether or not you and the community that you've created or have moved into are safe. And I do think that the Midwest continues to be, many Midwestern cities continue to struggle even with, and it's exactly what you're saying, Joey, where there's an introduction of new types of power and class dynamics, as well as a newly formed sense of what the in-group was that became so entrenched in what Americana is. So, and I think that a lot of that was happening in Midwest cities.
Yeah, the relative isolation that comes from like the reduced propinquity, as like the economists would say, like your like reduction in like urban density or population density means that the frequency of your interactions is reduced, and so that like communities are thinner and more distributed and are tending to organize around like a church or some, a school or something like that. And so, whereas like the frequency of interactions in an urban area like New York, like, DC or maybe DC is not a good example, but even Chicago or something like that sort of establishes some set of norms that are a little bit more predictable, that maybe favor an ask culture because there's like that, like a sort of implicit handshake in the agreement of like, this is how we do things, or I'm going to have to interact with people more frequently at the bodega or on the subway or just walking down the street. And so there's like some solidification that happens around a cultural dynamic of asking, right? Like even if you're thinking about, I brought up like Chinese culture here in the US. It was certainly where like my interactions are coming from, but a lot of the immigrants that came to the US at specific times were still coming from urban hubs post like social revolution, whether that be Hong Kong or Shanghai or, Fujian or wherever. And so they're coming from more dense areas that then maybe have also already solidified into some like handshake on an agreement. Whereas, you wind up like, I wonder if that if that plays out when you start going into like European cultures too, because there's such a variety of social cultures from, one language to the next, right? Like German culture is different than French culture is different than British culture.
Yeah, and I think what both of you are talking about also is like signaling in those places which is a more likely risk. Is there a higher risk of assertion in a Midwestern type culture where if you assert yourself in the wrong setting, that could be super dangerous for you, or you could offend someone tremendously, or like that risk is really high, versus maybe on like the East Coast or other cultures like it, the risk of ignorance is really high. And if you accidentally make the wrong step, it's better to just confirm and clarify, because otherwise you'll find yourself in a deeper mess, right?
Oh.
So it's like a different assessment of which is more likely.
You just like, I don't know, you poked my brain right in the left frontal gray matter part. And that's very lovely, and I appreciate it.
It's a technical term.
It's a mind wine.
You found the mind wine.
It's the tap in the mind wine tree.
Ooh. Yep, it's Chablis. That is the mind. No, that was the mind Chablis. You found it.
You uncorked it.
Yes.
You uncorked.
And you stayed away from the cold duck, which is good, because that part just doesn't even work. That part just tastes terrible, and it wonders why Andre put that in my head. What I love about it is that this is why these sorts of things are so fun, I think, is because you start to overlay them and it starts to reveal so much, where it's kind of like a horoscope, where it's like, it's trash, it doesn't matter, but it's an interesting way to think about why people are the way they are, and then you start to play around with it. And so, I don't know. I think that what I hope is that even if there are drawbacks to both guest culture and ask culture mixing, that ultimately people become better communicators. I just want the world to be able to communicate better, because we're all trash. I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah.
Why is it that the distance between our brains, our hearts, and our minds is always like a billion miles apart inside us, and then it has to go to someone else? Like that chasm, that's hard. So let's work on
that chasm.
Mm-hmm.
That chasm.
Yeah. That chasm. That was my video game voice.
Did Aaron do the wrap-up corner, or is Jess doing was that the wrap-up corner, I think?
My Goku moment was the wrap-up corner. I'll try it. Here we go. I think, we have, discussed this is my best Jess impression. I'm sorry. We have discussed.
You already did it.
Oh, I did already do it, right? I don't need to do it again. We already did it, right? Is that it?
Just say that chasm one more time.
Okay, here we go. That chasm! Wrapped. Done. That's it.
And we're back.
Well, Joanne, we're back. It's my rent joke, because I thought we were doing show tunes. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jess. Okay,
Got it.
cool.
Oh, yeah, no, totally.
Sorry.
This is my second and final episode that I will be recording from Amsterdam, which is where I am visiting, traveling, working, It's been really great. But it has also taught me something about myself, which is that the time difference working here and collaborating with folks from the States does not work for me, which is shocking, because actually for many of my colleagues here in the Amsterdam office of Sylvain, they love it. They love having this block of time in the morning to themselves, head down work, and then, a certain time hits and, they have a whole block of meetings in the afternoon. And it sort of compartmentalizes their days, and it just works for them. And meanwhile, I'm sitting here and I'm like, I don't know if this is a hot take, but I just feel like this is the worst. I'm so alone, so bored by myself. And in fact, I was even thinking about the times where I've been recording the episode from San Francisco and the West Coast. And even though waking up super early isn't great, finishing the day at a cool 3 p.m. and having the whole afternoon with sunlight and that just works for me. So anyway, I just am really curious. What are your ideal working hours?
Okay, so I have a very, very strong opinion about these things.
Of course you do.
In my dream of dreams, so I keep my work hours really, really tight. I start at 8, I take a break from noon to 1, I'm back on from 1 to 5, and then I'm on call for the evening. That is the rhythm that I have structured for myself. It's very, very tight. I wouldn't say that it is optimized toward how I like to work. So to your point, Jess, my ideal rhythm would be 2 to 3 hours of uninterrupted time in the morning from like 8 to 11. So the Amsterdam life, if you will. And then after that, so that every day, everything that needs to be done that is, heads down work, or even, heads down is one way to be thinking about it. But the other thing is that elusive, like, mind wandering time. For me, my mind is most fertile in the morning. And so to let it actually roam in the mornings rather than immediately getting into collaboration would be, I think I'd be 80 times more pleasant, 20 times more productive, and 5% happier. I don't know. But then
stats.
Yes, stats. And then the rest of the day, I do like if the rest of the day were collaboration, I'm down. And I like kinesthetic collaboration. So it is one thing that I miss from being in an office space with multiple people. I was actually at a client's office yesterday with a couple folks, and we were post-iting, and I genuinely was like, this is so awesome. I miss this so much.
I miss Post-its.
And we literally did nothing with them. We had 7 Post-its across the top of a board. We did not put anything on the board. But that sort of collaboration where it's like, thinking and then breaking thinking together would be like the dream day. But that's also why I think I'm going to be a writer in a future life, because as you can tell, there's not actually any production of content. There's no slides, there's no written evidence of what great thought we had together. So I don't know, maybe philosopher is what I'm going for.
Got it.
So yeah.
Philosopher working hours.
That's my hope.
Okay.
Joey, what about you?
Yeah, I feel like I don't know. I'm so averse to locked in things that, and I don't know if that's like a personality, like constitutional deficit, and that I would actually work better if things were more. I was thinking about like exercise recently, and like the past month and a half outside. I mean, I'm still riding my bike every day, but I haven't been able to like get in other like exercise things like, lifting or anything like that. And I'm like, should I just like lock it in 2 days a week that I'm going to do it on these times and like adjust into my schedule? And I'm like, maybe that would work, but it's so like antithetical to my personality. And so like, like time of day is sort of an interesting thing for me. Like because I have a kid, like there are wake up times and things like that are locked in. I'm more of my like normal time to go to sleep, if left to my own devices, is like, 12 or 1 or something like that. But like I still have to get up every day at the same time because my daughter gets up every day at the same time. And so like time of day shift for me would be like start work at 10, go till 7 or something like that. But Alen recently said something to me where he's like, oh, you're the best in the morning, right? And I was like, what? Like, and he's like, oh yeah, no, for sure. And I was like, well, we've only been working together for 12 and a half years. Like, how
so
has this
I
never
guess
come
you
up?
would know.
And like, yeah, like I don't know about this. And it made me think about just the fact that I'm like, because I'm riding in and I'm getting that exercise and things like that, like, should I be doing some kind of like midday exercising as well to like make my afternoon more productive or whatever? Like we spoke about, Nora and I, a few weeks ago about like the idea of a discomfort diet and like what sort of psychological benefits you can get from like introduction of pain, exercise being an example of that. And I'm like,
I thought you were going to say like spicy
like,
foods. Okay.
maybe like doing like the hot ones challenge or something like that. But that part of it, I don't know. And I feel like I just don't have, like, it's sort of a blind spot for me. I know that if I was sleeping from like 1 until like 9 in the morning, I would probably be functioning closer to my normal like circadian rhythms and things like that. But otherwise I'm like, I don't know. Like, what's good? Something.
So Jess, how have you found not resolving, but finding, like force fitting your ideal rhythm with this structure, this, structural rhythm, for lack of a better term?
This is the thing, right? Because I don't know for me if it is as much about my best time during the day, which, I mean, y'all can tell me differently, but I don't know if I have a best time of the day so much as it is I have spurts of productivity and it depends on what I'm doing. And I would just love, for convenience's sake, to fit into that structure if it were aligned with like a bigger single chunk of time as opposed to smaller sub-chunks, which is what happens in my New York state, which is like kind of like an hour in the morning and then like an hour at the end of the day besides like cooking and maybe like one other activity. It's like that's my day is kind of written for me, whereas if there's a larger chunk, there's more freedom. It's like, whoa, what couldn't you do? You could go to the zoo.
Yes.
You could go to the zoo if you finished work at 3.
Which I will say, I haven't done this a lot recently. We bought a zoo. I haven't done this recently, but I did. When I first moved here to LA, I was a lot better about like finding other spaces to work in so I could have a little bit of the zoo vibe, or like a little bit of the change in scenery vibe to help like manage my state. And I think that's the interesting thing is there's one thing which is like the natural state, where you fit, where you work, where you're heightened, where you're lowered. And then there's managing your state and like seeing how much you can actually flex within the confines of the superstructure. And one morning I went and I worked in one of my favorite parks, and the way in which I was productive still shocks me. Like I still think about that day. I think I was putting together an approach to a new challenge that we were going to be taking on board. And I was able to, within like a 2-hour time period in the morning, do like 4 hours of deep thinking work where like the actual stuff that was on the paper was like, I would come back to it and I'm like, that is the way to do this.
Yes.
That. And
yes, me.
And to your point, Jess, those micro spurts, that is, oh man, I feel like that's what we're always fighting against, is like how to make fewer of those happen. And even like with teams, I try to squeeze in like at least an hour and a half like jam sessions where possible, but it's not usually possible anyway. And so it is interesting adapting, learning how much you can contribute and in what ways you can contribute when that's the that's the time constraint, and that's going to be your state constraint as well, because you're jumping from half hour to 15 minutes to half hour like all day long. It's wild stuff. It's wild and crazy stuff. Yeah, I definitely watched an hour and a half of Wild and Crazy Kids this weekend. It was on YouTube. They have a 5-hour Saturday morning block from Classic Nick, and I definitely observed that for a while this weekend. It was good.
Well, I think that brings us to Jess's productivity corner.
Well, sounds like Erin's ideal working hours are the philosopher working hours. Joey's ideal working hours are absolutely no restricted working
Chaos.
hours whatsoever. Yes. And Jess's preferred working hours are consolidated so that there's plenty of time to go to the zoo. Choose your own adventure. Whatever path suits your boat, floats your, yep, you just do you.
You just do you. I love it. That's so good. It's so wrapped. Call it Spotify because that's wrapped.
Yeah.
I've been working on trying to find another pun. It took a long time. I finally got one.
Call it Phineas Gage because you put a stake in.
Oh, neuroscience humor makes me laugh. That's good.
So funny.
That's good.
Critical Nonsense is a Sylvain production.
Brought to you by Squirrel J. Squirrel Attorney Academy. Teaching squirrels that run by my window all the time how to be the best esquire they can be.
As always, we'd like to thank executive producer and rodent herder, Jess Vander.
Woof.
We'd also like to thank sound engineer and muckraker Alex Contel. I don't know why he's a muckraker. Just,
We'd like to thank our programming coordinator, Les Jacobs, for being the king of the ungulates.
And Nora Mestrich and Sari Gilbert for all that you do, for all that you wilt, for all that you won't. Thank you for being the production crew.
And as always, thanks, Ellen. Special thanks
Thank you.
to squirrels, I guess.
Oh, they're awesome. They're so good. They're better than skunks, I can tell you that much.
Wow. Special thanks to the Amsterdam office for hosting me and Ryan the last 2 weeks. It has been a pleasure.
Nice.
Thanks to, people with good energy, whether you're guess or ask, if you're filling
Or a
up other
son.
people's tanks, we're out here for you.
I was here for that, Jess. We out here for you. It's true. And I'd also like to
Jules! Sorry, go ahead.
Vern.
Kilocalories.
That's better, actually.
Okay.
I would also, I would like to thank plants right now. To your point about sunshine, good feelings, the more plants you got around you, man, it just buoys spirits.
Yes.
And everybody feels a little bit better with plants. So, all right, plants.
Buoy. Buoy your spirits.
Buoy.
Get some plants.
Buoy,
Fine.
buoy.
Buoy, buoy.
Thanks to feedback responsive euphoria, for just like people just, feeling good and doing good stuff, I guess. I don't know. Like internet. Thanks for the internet? No,
Nope,
thanks.
Nope. That can,
No,
that can go
thanks.
away.
No,
Trash.
no thanks for the internet.
Nope.
We did it. No thank you, internet. Love you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Okay, great. Bye. Just say that chasm one more time.
Okay, here we go. That chasm! Wrapped. Done. That's it.
You can
Chasm.
Oh, I thought you were going to sing it to the tune of Tradition from Fiddler on the Roof.
Nope.
That
Don't know
chasm.
what
That chasm. That chasm.
I'm sorry. It's so good. It's so good. Oh, God.
It's good to have you
Aaron
back.
and Jess's Show Tunes Corner.
I love it.
Critical high notes.
Critical
Coming.
high notes. I'm telling you. Oh, no. Actually, has to be a thing. Critical high notes is so good.
This has to be a thing.